Welcome. Thank you for joining today's session on how to build connections to the future with the Corepoint Integration Engine. Today's session will feature a conversation with UnityPoint Health. First, some housekeeping, a few logistical reminders. Today is a live session and is being recorded. Anyone who registered for this event will receive a link to the recording within 24 hours. And while we're in listen-only mode, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to send them in the chat. We'll do our best to answer your questions during the session or following. The format we'll follow today is a conversation between Lyle and Dan from our longtime partner, UnityPoint Health, both experts in interoperability, and Dmitry Katanik and myself. If you struggle to find good news in your news feed, today you're in luck, because besides talking about what is new with Corepoint Integration Engine, we're privileged to have Dan and Lyle with us today to discuss their perspective on UnityPoint's interoperability success over the years. It's always exciting to hear about what great things people are doing with Corepoint and other Rhapsody health solutions, but today we're talking with an organization that our records show have been using Corepoint in some capacity for over 13 years. That's really incredible, Lyle and Dan, and we really appreciate you both sharing some insights from your experience with the Corepoint integration and the best practices that you've been able to put in place. After talking with you both a couple of times already, I know others will find of great value what you have to share and see how you've expanded the utilization of Corepoint across the enterprise with phenomenal success. Lyle and Dan, would you mind giving a brief introduction of yourself and your time at UnityPoint, and then you and I will follow on our side.
Yeah, hi there. This is Lyle Zeringer, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to tell us, for us to tell our story. I've been with UnityPoint for a little over 6 years now. I'm the newest member of the team, and I've been in healthcare interoperability for about 11 years.
Yeah, my name's Dan Krieger. Happy to be here today, and I've been with UnityPoint Health for 9 years, and I did have healthcare experience kind of first with UnityPoint, but got some experience in the aviation industry and some of the process improvement and getting those sorts of things squared away. So having the healthcare background now is and bringing that experiences to the integration engine has been just phenomenal here. So happy to share our story.
I'll introduce myself. My name is Dmitry Katanik. I'm product manager of Corepoint. Been with the company for 11 years now. I started originally as a developer, work on the configuration and the back end of the engine, and then gradually moved on to the product management role, and really excited about this conversation. UnityPoint has been an excellent client of ours for a long time now, and a good influencer in a good sense on what we do, and really happy that we can have this conversation and share your best practices with us.
Thank you all, and my name is Dan Rice. I'm product marketing manager here at Rhapsody. So before we get into the root of the conversation, I'd like to set the stage for our conversation today by looking at a couple of representations of the industry. I ran across this Gartner graphic that was taken from a survey back at the end of last year with healthcare executives, and I thought it really related well to the conversation today. There's many big picture initiatives listed here that participants identified as investments that they had made in the last 2 years. So if we glance at the top 4 or 5, these are overarching categories really, but we have improve operational excellence, improve the customer or citizen experience, ensure business continuity, increase innovation, increase employee productivity, and even grow revenue, and the list goes on. But looking at the 2 most prominent digital investments, identified in the survey, over 50% of respondents said that they had invested in those top 2 to improve operational excellence and improve the customer experience. The outcomes of these investments could have been many things, from serving the patient population more efficiently, improve preventative measures because of monitoring devices, improve clinician-patient interaction from patient portals, and the list can go on and on. We could talk about that all day. But one common theme or thread with all of these would often be an enterprise approach to integration and interoperability. And that's why we're here today. how can any of these things reach their full potential without the right integration tools? And really just quick thought from Lyle or Dan, what on this list resonates with you, with things you've seen at UnityPoint over the last couple of years?
Yeah, Dan. So we have, I mean, we've definitely seen the resource investment in, especially those top three items. And I really think those have helped us get us to where we are now. So to give you a few examples, we're generally proactive in our support work. We're not reactive. We're not putting out fires. We're rarely woken up in the middle of the night by alerts. Relative to the number of interfaces we have very few alerts. Pretty relatively large organization. Our engine uptimes are incredible, and we'll get into some of that later. And then, regarding the continuity, we've experienced natural disaster. We're based in Iowa and Illinois, and typically you think of that as an area that doesn't have a lot of natural disaster. But we did, and we needed to move we had data center disruption. We had to move our engine into a DR infrastructure. And so of all of the top tier applications at our health system, Corepoint was the very first one that was back up and running. And we did that almost entirely by ourselves. And that was due to, a robust tested DR plan, robust architecture, which we'll also get into. And in case you're curious, the natural disaster was called a derecho. If you'd never heard of one, I had never heard of one. It's an inland hurricane, and it wasn't the storm actually that caused the problems. It was the response to the storms, severing cables and stuff like that. So it can happen anywhere.
Absolutely, and you were prepared. That's excellent. Yeah, the next, and I appreciate that, Lyle. The next graphic we have is from a slightly different audience, a different survey from the American Medical Association, and it spoke to the adoption of digital tools by physicians over the last 6 years, from 2016 to 2022, to be more precise. And of course, things that were once a luxury item over that time frame, like televisits, skyrocketed. They became a required commodity during the pandemic, of course, but other categories also saw a significant uptick as well, including patient engagement, clinical decision support, as well as some others. Those two doubled in size. And with the growth of digital tools, what we're getting at, it certainly speaks to the amount of new data that teams like yours are having to face on a daily basis, that continuous growth. And while that data can be used to serve the patient population and the consumer, it needs to be managed carefully, securely, and it needs to be managed appropriately. And of course, here's where we insert Corepoint. I assume that UnityPoint's not that different, but what has the UnityPoint team seen in regards to these trends and increase of information?
Yeah, so I mean, we've been no stranger to this same trend. We talk about telehealth. When we had the pandemic, we went through the same expansion of telehealth, and those were new messages that we hadn't encountered before. Getting into more current day, we have the Cures Act and US CDI standard, and a lot more people are reaching out to get their data. So talking about the consumer access, seeing a lot of trends with more access there, and also with HIEs, health information exchanges. We've seen a growing engagement for promoting interoperability programs and local, state, and federal agencies wanting access to the data. So, they have various means, right? Population health, helping smaller facilities get access to the data that maybe the larger facilities have. But, there is a growing trend for more data and pushing that out to other locations and endpoints. And so, we need the robust infrastructure to be able to meet those demands that we're facing.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Dimitri for just a couple of slides, and he's going to talk to Corepoint and some of the things that have occurred on the roadmap during that time. Dimitri?
Yeah, so I think for our audience that may be not familiar with the Corepoint, or just if you want to hear a backstory of a Corepoint product, the mission has always been to lower the barrier to interoperability in even complex interop. with ability to build interfaces faster and make the building of interfaces accessible to a wide variety of skill sets. So that's the first and foremost idea behind Corepoint. And of course, we built on that idea over the years. We've been able to satisfy our clients and prospect and build over 14 years of class #1 score, which we take very seriously. Not so much even for the score, but for the kind of service we provide to organizations like UnityPoint. Make sure that we get out of the way, that people can get a good night's sleep and not be woken up at night with an unreliable product. With that in mind, what we've been doing over the years is building the capabilities around the integration, around the development, so that there's more tools up front, so you can do more testing up front, so there's less surprises when you go, even when doing integration testing. So that those are the features that are important to the integration engine. And of course, again, looking at the marketplace, it's historically started as an HL7 engine. Over the years, have been in demand for non-HL7 type of standards in healthcare. And so that's where we had our focus over the last few years, to make sure that we support FHIR, web services, and so forth, to basically, again, enable everything to come through Corepoint. So you have just one single tool to roll them all, so to speak, so you don't have to utilize other applications outside. And the last thing I'll mention is that we've made a lot of investments in making sure that you have a great situational awareness inside the product. So you have excellent alerting, monitoring tool, logging, and so forth. So again, to bring all back into one single package and just reduce your burden of enabling interoperability as a first-class service to your clients, to patients. So as we look at the our journey together, I know that UnityPoint was introduced to our engine, Corepoint, around 2014. So there are a couple of features that we've introduced on that journey, and I kind of want to intertwine what Corepoint did and then what UnityPoint has been doing in that time. And you can see we had about, between 2014 and 2018, we had about 4 major releases. And the journey for Corepoint has been that we started with the file-based approach for logging, and then as we started to see that we want to expand the enterprise capabilities of the engine, we started looking into more efficient platform for us to handle scale, and that's where the SQL Server came into play, that we moved our queues and logs into SQL Server. We improved configuration application, which is an IDE application on Corepoint, moved to 64-bit, and start building on the resiliency of the queues and logs. And eventually we've introduced a new monitor, which is a modern HTML application. So Lyle, Dan, if you can kind of talk about how you were introduced to Corepoint. What do you experience, and kind of what your journey been up to 2018?
Yeah, so I mean, our developers were no different than what you kind of described there, Dimitri. I mean, we had some people on the clinical technician side. We had some former developers for interfaces, of course, but then also non-healthcare. I mean, some software developers, engineers, former help desk resources, reporting, billing people, and even in one case, we had a person who did some farming and is still doing that. So ultimately, when we came in 2015, we were a 15 hospital system, kind of based out of Des Moines, Iowa, and we were looking at what you get from not upgrading and not paying attention to maintenance, right? We were an outdated integration engine, and we were not supporting our own servers. We had another team kind of supporting that for us. And so we were dealing with constant struggles with downtimes, and were really impacting the organization and providers, clinicians, patients. When they don't get their data, nobody's happy. Everybody's waiting, and decisions need to be made. So in 2015, we had the opportunity of doing an integration with Meritor Health Services out of Madison, Wisconsin. And so at that point, we had the opportunity to look at the Corepoint product and kind of make a decision. Are we going to take a look at Corepoint and use that? Are we going to upgrade our existing engine? And the big selling points for us was that Corepoint really was not heavy on the coding and syntax. You could essentially work more on developing the workflow and the testing as opposed to worrying about syntax errors. And in fact, we were told that the product, by design, if you were using it properly, you could not have a syntax error. So that was a huge thing. Also, the 32-bit encryption migration to 64-bit architecture, was really key for us in the v6 model to be able to use all of our on-prem data that we had. We didn't have any restrictions or throttling there, and being able to take the Windows Server model as opposed to the Unix server, being able to do our own maintenance and develop maintenance plans. We could actually do maintenance as opposed to just talking about it, which is where we were previously at. And so, ultimately we decided to go with Corepoint and use some of their business services to migrate off some connections, but then also through some training that we received on site from Corepoint, we could do some actual use cases of what we could kind of build off of, and not just have to use the training that was sort of stock. We could kind of customize that and get through the training a little bit faster, and really have a lot of impact with the Corepoint product.
Yeah, that's great. And so we got together at, I think, one of the connects in 2018, talked with Joe Hamilton about where you basically arrived at that point, from being on the engine for a few years. And already at that point, you guys were seeing great improvement, of 50% reduction in the interface development time and cost. And also at that point, you were running about 300 interface already. And so maybe you can talk about that, and then how did you, what kind of changes you've seen since then? What kind of challenges you have been solving?
Yeah, so we had about 300 or so interfaces and maybe 600 connections. I think the business services were able to do 300, and I think we did 300 ourselves. So that training, that on-site training was really key for us to get through that a little bit quicker. And with the Corepoint support that we were receiving, we got a lot of information on best practices and really took that to heart. So, the conventions that Corepoint recommends, when to use parent action list gears for parallel processing, when to, use a code set, when to do something maybe in the action list. Those were all the things that we started engaging in right away to figure out what has the least amount of overhead costs to really maximize our processing. And so, over the years into 2018, we've just continued to, grow that, continue to go back to Corepoint and driving to root cause, identifying some issues and seeing, what can Corepoint do to help us overcome. And as Corepoint's been growing, there really hasn't been a challenge that Corepoint hasn't been able to give us a solution to. And so the support that we got has just been phenomenal. And every upgrade that we do with our EMR or every new integration brings more messaging. And so having a engine that is able to meet the demands as opposed to being limited has really helped us kind of get to where we're at now in 2018 and beyond, where you guys met with Joe to really make sure that we can meet all of our demands.
And so since then, recently you reached quite a big of milestone. So I'd like for you guys to talk about that. It's pretty awesome, 1,000 days of no unplanned downtime. I really wanted to kind of focus on how did you get there. I don't believe in accidents. Things like this did not happen by accident. I'm sure there was a lot of hard work, and I'm sure that people in our audience would love to hear about how you got there and what it takes. So talk about this achievement, because I'm sure your team is very proud.
Sure. I kind of wanted to go over to Lyle quick just to kind of talk through some of the features that we sort of used to kind of build this background of how we used it ultimately. So Lyle, could you speak to that?
Yeah, are you talking about some of the support services? And yeah. So so support was a big factor for us too, and in the early days, utilizing professional services for the migration, and kind of in partnership with professional services, which helped to establish those best practices, right? Straight out of the gate, gave us a great platform. And then, just the general support levels, which I think Dan kind of alluded to there. And then, in your timeline there, the support for the SQL clustering, remote databases, allowing us the redundancy in our databases, Windows SQL clustering specifically. We'll get into the architecture, I think, here pretty soon.
Yeah, so I mean, basically the premise is that we have a lot of stuff in the product that we've built on, and so I think in 2020 we had something like 373 days of uptime, and ultimately what led to that being a downtime at that point in May of 2020 is we had some infrastructure that went down. I think it was a controller hardware, and so the Corepoint product itself stayed up. And so what we learned from some of these things is that Corepoint wasn't going down, it was our infrastructure. And so we took a little bit more deliberate approach to the infrastructure and how that intertwines with the engine to really create a sustainable model for the organization as a whole. So, we have the 64-bit architecture, we have the assured availability, we have the SQL clustering, but what else do we need to have? So it was implementing our best practices from Corepoint, the standards and the testing methodologies, the what do we do when things are starting to go bad, have some proactive monitoring. But we also invested, excuse me, in maintenance plans and DR plans, as we kind of alluded to a little bit. So what does it mean to do maintenance? What are the steps to do maintenance? And how do we make sure when things go wrong, what are our first escalation points that we have to do? We talk about, the investing in the relationship building within the organization. So talking to the database team, talking to storage, infrastructure, VM, monitoring. Sometimes, we don't have all these people on our team and they have information that we don't. And so how do we get that to be a little bit more proactive so that we can take some steps on the infrastructure side before it becomes a problem for the engine? One thing our organization did was we classified our application for Corepoint as a tier 1 app. And that was really key because now when somebody's going in and they're looking at our stuff on the infrastructure side, they know it's a tier 1 app. And so they have certain ways of going about touching the application, and they'll come to us first as opposed to just making a decision to upgrading something or changing some hardware. And something we did on our side is we created a engine management team, which was just a fancy way of saying we have some subject matter experts that will take a focused approach to the engine. So capturing different metrics that are all available within the Corepoint Integration Engine, establishing trends and driving to root cause. When we have some people on the team that are having issues, we can either coach, mentor, or take things back to Corepoint support to drive to what's the best practice for this, and then maintaining the documents, the infrastructure diagrams and templates. Those are the things that the engine management team has really done to keep a deliberate focus on the engine and the infrastructure. But there's really nothing we can't do in the Corepoint engine. We can do quite a few things, but we need to make sure that is also working well with the infrastructure, and having that all put together really creates the least amount of downtime and the uptimes that we're seeing now, which is, I think we're at 1,015 days of actual uptime.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah, and saying that you've organized yourself to create a sophisticated redundancy around the engine is understatement. When you shared your diagram of how each instance of engine is backed up, I really geeked out over it, because it's really sort of textbook approach, and just with integration, when you say that PS and support would give you best practices about how to approach integration, and you really listened, you really then really get the benefit long term out of doing that. And I see that with the hardware setup, you basically did the same thing. I think you did really smart textbook approach here of how to basically guarantee your redundancy and ensure availability. I would love for you guys to talk about how you arrived to this. What are the challenges you met along the way of getting to this setup?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about this. And let me just go over it because it's a little, I think it's a little bit to digest for someone who's never seen it before. So you have the reddish area, which is our primary data center, and then you have the green area, which is our backup data center. The top row of servers are application servers, and the bottom row are all of the remote SQL servers in a Windows SQL cluster. So we have the primary and the backup application servers, which are running in our primary data center in an A2 configuration. And then we have the DR server, which is in our backup data center. Now on the DR application server, we have the application installed. So for instance, when we do an upgrade, we upgrade the A2 nodes and we upgrade the DR node. And then we bring all of the services down on that DR node. We have regularly scheduled config and administrative backups in Corepoint that write those files out to network shares, but also directly to that application server. So should we need to use it, everything we need is there to bring it up, restore the configs and connect it up to the database. So with regard to the SQL servers, you'll see that the primary and secondary nodes are writing synchronously. So when one is updated, the other one is updated immediately before moving on. One challenge that we noticed was that we were seeing particularly high volume, and we observed that the amount of time it was taking to write to the SQL node in the backup data center was taking a little bit longer. So we partnered with our internal database team, who recommended that we switch this over to an asynchronous write. So which opens up the possibility for minor data loss should we have something go down, a problem with the primary data center. But it also opens up the possibility of those primary data center SQL nodes from just run as fast as they can, which really helps us, handle some of the extremely high volumes that we can see.
That's pretty awesome. And your backup data center, where is it located approximately as far as in relations to the primary?
Within 100 miles.
Okay, awesome. So it's physically a different location. That's the key.
It's a physically different location.
Yeah, to assuring disaster recovery, because basically if something happens, you're able to switch over to the backup data center. And then you have, as far as, I'm always curious with the vendors that connecting up to the engine, how you're switching them over in case you do need to switch over to the disaster recovery.
Yeah, so we are using connectivity through NetScaler, which manages all of our IP protocols, but it really allows us to, bring in, network folks and have them point our service IP to another machine and, have us up and running with minimal effort.
Okay. And how did you establish good relationship with your data folks, and how did you get everybody on board? Is that just happened because you classified engine as a tier 1 and now everybody has to pay attention? Or more...
Well, there's some of that. There's also, it's in everyone's best interest to have the thing working smoothly. you know, and so I think, you know, it was kind of a natural evolution that as we kind of form these internal partnerships with teams that, you know, our lives just got easier.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, as long as we're staying on top of it and driving to those root causes, you know, eventually you see the benefits.
Yeah.
Everyone sees them.
Yeah, and when unplanned downtime happens, first and foremost, patients hurt the most because their
Yes.
orders not getting through. Doctors have to figure out how to pass them to the bedside and so forth. It's a huge impact. People don't realize that people in the back rooms servicing the engine are hurting too because now they have to wake up. You have to fight the all the fires and try to put the continuity back up. And then come morning, you're probably not in the mood to start working on a new interface. So your new interface development starts slowing down. The ability to onboard new services is slowing down. Is that true?
Yes, exactly. Like, right. You shift the workload from um, you know, putting out fires to doing new stuff, new stuff, fun stuff. I mean, if you talk to any interface developer, they probably enjoy building new interfaces and
Right.
developing rather than you know, chasing around you know, little missing data pieces, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that someone forgot in the EMR or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so people on the call, I really want them to take a look at this diagram and kind of think through that if you take the planned approach to your interoperability infrastructure, you can enable yourself basically less stress and ability to be efficient and move forward as far as onboarding new services and just being everybody just being happy as a result because of this investment. So you guys are shining example of such investment. And so what's amazing, you don't have just one cluster like this, you actually have two. And so and your data throughput is pretty large. So why don't you guys talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, yes. So so production engine one is where about 90% of our interfaces are. The typical stuff that you would think of, ADT orders, result scheduling, charges. The second engine we have with biomedical device interfaces. We have, you know, you can see the number of connections there. They tend to be chatty interfaces, a large volume. So the decision was made to have a second engine for those. One thing that's significantly different about the second engine is that we don't keep connection log data for very long. We, you know, we really don't have a use for it. So whereas, you know, it's important, it can be important to help troubleshoot things, to keep orders and ADT around for 3 or 4 weeks. It's not so much on the biomedical device engine. And we also on the second engine, we do some tools, some internal tools. We do some web services there.
Okay. And so that was a very good point that you made a conscious decision about how you're separating the engines so that the data that you really need to keep logs and they're important are segregated to engine one, whereas second one is basically more of the device data that's flying through and the logging there is not as important. And so did you guys arrive to this immediately, like this decision, or it kind of came naturally out of just your experience?
Dimitri, that is before my time.
So yeah, I mean, ultimately, you know, this kind of shows the trend that, you know, as we're going over, I think 3 months here, you know, kind of generally see a trend where, you know, the data is increasing, and so, you know, there's emerging needs to constantly be meeting the volumes, and so Corepoint's able to do that for us, and you know, we're just constantly looking at the engine, making sure that things are going well, CPU isn't getting too high. When we need to apply more resources, we can. But you know, there's always upgrade capability, and we're not having any challenges with keeping up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Since then, there have been a lot of movements on the Corepoint side. Of course, we always year in year out, month in month out, we develop new features, looking at what the market needs, what you guys telling us, our customers. And so over the recent years, we've introduced features like Actionless Debugger, which I'm sure you guys love. That just enables you to actively debug without doing the integration testing end to end. Web service enhancements. We introduced standalone configuration that goes towards the distributed development initiative we have. I'll talk about that in a bit. But one of the latest ones that we are showing here is the administration REST API. And the goal of this is for our engine to expose the controls and pathways to get the data out of the engine related to your interfaces and related to the services around the engine. So that you can use that data to integrate with a third-party platform for analytics, for reporting. I know some organizations set up like war rooms, and they have a common application that shows statistics and real-time status from all of the interop systems, and they want to bring that data into one place. They'll be able to do now with an API from Corepoint. They'll be able to extract the data and populate the data center. But the one other thing that is kind of important that becomes available is that you can automate your maintenance. The ability to stop and start services and relate it to A2. I know you guys been looking into this for quite a bit of time. You've participated in the beta process for this feature over the last year. Can you please talk about some of the things that you would like to do and already doing with this API and why?
Sure. I can talk to that. I'll start with the automation of the maintenance process. So we've been automating maintenance is one of those things that we've wanted to do for a long time as a satisfier to our team. As you could imagine, with 2 production engines and 6 nodes on each engine.
Right.
So we've scheduled the maintenance of all but the A2 engines, the A2 servers. And so the next step then is, how do we do the last 4? You know, so yes, I've been playing around with the beta process, the over failback reboot, and we're continuing to work on that. You know, the most obvious struggle I think there is the inherently unreliable Windows patching and reboot process, whichever, you know, the solution that you build has to adapt to that. But that is something that we're working on. And then outside of maintenance automation, we write to a database every time an alert happens that pages one of our on-call developers from a connection, say. And we can gather some additional information about the state of the engine at that time when that alert occurred, and write that along with the data that is in the alert. And that becomes like a huge repository of mineable data. So we're using Power BI to slice and dice that data, with essentially the goal to, to make sure we're driving at the problem connections, and we're observing the trends that are happening on such a large scale. So that's another thing that we're working towards. And then a few more ideas. Daylight savings time. We have a weird process whereby a system doesn't like it that we send data with the 2 same timestamps in a row. So we stop connections, we purge some data, we start connections. Well, those are potentially leveraged by the API, scheduled schedulable, and so we are looking at doing that as well. And then also the ability to query the connection annotation sets. So, when you create a connection, it's the area where you would put support information typically. So if there's a problem with that connection, you're following up from the material that's in there. As a standard, we require information, at least an annotation set with every connection, provided it's not a gear. So the ability to run, say, an audit report on all of our connections and ensure that they have some sort of annotations associated with them, something that we could run ad hoc, something that we could schedule and write a CSV file out to review, is also something that we're looking at doing. So those are just a few examples, and I should say that we're planning to use these tools within Corepoint. So using the tools within Corepoint to use the Corepoint API to tell it information about itself or do information to it. So for instance, the connection annotation set audit, we could be auditing the production engines, but we could run that from our test engine.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's pretty smart. Yeah, so those are great examples. Yeah, it sounds like you really want to leverage ability to retrospective on an issue, and with be able to extract data and then correlate state of the engine, state of connections with the nature of the alert. You can then do it much later, as far as don't do the retro at the moment of fighting a fire. You can then get together and see if there's trends, if there's anything common thread that among the failures that you can then go back and fix at a sort. Awesome. Okay, yeah, so I think it's worth talking about what we are working on next at Corepoint. What are the big initiatives for us? We are actually being pretty bold about the breadth of problems we wanted to solve. And so I want to kind of quickly go over it. One of the first priorities for us is last year we launched Corepoint as a service offering that enables organizations that don't have the resources and the benefit of being able to set up a 6-node redundant infrastructure to quickly onboard on the interoperability with the Corepoint, still write interfaces, still manage the connections, but don't manage the infrastructure, don't manage the capacity to do the to facilitate resiliency. That's something that we take on ourselves now. And the second one, I think it's something that UnityPoint will benefit, is the distributed development initiative. So standalone configuration was a part of it. But the next step is what we're trying to do is minimize the need to remote into the server and work on a common server. So idea is that the standalone configuration application becomes an IDE that's able to connect to your repository on the engine remotely, and you'll be able to pull and push and also activate your change. So the reason for you to actually log on to the engine as a developer becomes smaller and smaller. And so we see that benefit both on-prem and in the cloud. And the third one I'll mention is of course, the benefit of us being part of the large organization, and now we've recently renamed ourselves Rhapsody, is that we have a lot of other offerings to enable interop. So we have semantics to enable more advanced code set correlation management outside of the engine. We have the API capabilities when you need to reconcile patient data, and we have API gateway. I'll let Dan here to talk about this a little bit more in detail.
Sure. Yeah, and real quick before we jump to the next slide, and I think you guys gave a lot of good advice already, but I don't know that we talked about necessarily where you see your integration. We just talked about kind of what our future plans are. Where do you see your integration needs going in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, as we were kind of showcasing at the very beginning, where those digital investments were going into, we have kind of changed that paradigm of, before we were looked at as just HL7 interface developers, right? And now we're switching that to interoperability. So leveraging the FHIR, the API protocols. There can be some investments that we've been looking into, and some we've realized with integration of Salesforce and ServiceNow, being able to use ServiceNow to create tickets and alerts to other teams. So instead of us being woken up, it's another team that's being woken up because they're the ones that can actually do something about it. You can only go so far with resetting the connection before you got to wake some other team up. And so, leveraging those capabilities, thinking outside of the box of just Corepoint, and how can we bring Corepoint to use other, other software solutions to, get things moving better within the organization, alerting, developing maybe a pull mentality versus a push. Eventually, we're going to see a lot more API and FHIR integration things that are using that pull model, because pull models are more efficient and they're lean, they're just in time. So, leveraging those capabilities within Corepoint to be able to position us better for the future. I know that we've been talking about, or we talked about some of the HIE stuff, and I think that's going to evolve into more pull mentalities. Right now, we're getting a lot of push data, but we've got a lot of capabilities within the Corepoint engine to meet the tomorrow needs. And so, we don't really have any interoperability challenges that we can't meet without Corepoint, or with Corepoint, sorry.
That's great to hear. Thank you guys so much for providing all of this information today. And to add to kind of what you're saying, and Dimitri's third point about enabling data quality improvements, Corepoint is certainly a foundational element towards better interoperability. And as you've been expanding what you're doing and your needs, we've also been expanding what we can handle. So you can always use your best-in-class Corepoint engine to accelerate your integration timeline, but now you can lean on our identity solution to support master data management strategy. You can use our semantic solution to provide terminology management to enable cross-mapping of all healthcare vocabularies, including diagnostic, lab, and procedure codes. And of course, we need security. So we can leverage our API gateway to secure and monitor exchange of information with these new authorized third parties that are coming our way. So in other words, we can help you with the full suite to do exactly what it says on the screen, to empower applications, to empower clinical workflows. And if you're on the call and you're new to hearing about this, please let us know. We'd love to talk to you more about it. Don't think that, do we have any more questions? Let's check that real quick before we have our closeout of the call.
Yeah, I want to invite attendees to ask any questions, maybe just ask in the chat. We have a really great group here. I've been really looking forward to having conversation with the UnityPoint folks. So that's a great opportunity if you're thinking about how to increase resiliency in your environment, best practices. These are the great people to ask those questions to.
Awesome. I think we don't have any questions. I think it's because we provided so much information. So again, thank you so much, Lyle and Dan. Thank you for everyone else for dialing in, our current partners and customers and future customers. We wouldn't be doing this without you. So thank you everyone for dialing in. I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
Of course. Thank you.
Have a nice day. Bye.